If you're an immigration specialist at a company, communicate with stakeholders in your organizations, the foreign national employees, their managers, anyone else who depends on their work. There could be expected delays in processing times for the impacted case types. That could particularly be, for instance, if you're planning to file an H-1B petition to bring on board a newly hired employee and you haven't received their certified LCA yet, then their start date will likely have to be postponed.
Thank you all for tuning in to this important video update from Envoy Global and Corporate Immigration Partners. Today I'm joined by Ian Love, a partner at Corporate Immigration Partners with over 10 years at working in the immigration law field. Ian, thank you so much for hopping on today to discuss a very important topic.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Glad to be here, although not so glad about the news that we have to share on some of these topics.
I know what you mean. I feel like the last few weeks, it's always something new when it comes to immigration. The last few weeks, it was about the October visa bullets, and everyone was waiting for that. And now we have to shift our attention to a potential government shutdown. So, Ian, we are recording this the late morning slash early afternoon on September 22nd. And by all accounts, it seems like the government may shut down October 1st. This is because some of the dysfunction in Congress, which we may hit on in a second. But just glancing at some news, outside media reporting from the New York Times, Politico, Axios, etc., all of their reports seemingly indicate that there will be a government shutdown at the end of the month. All right. So, Ian, the Congress may not pass a bill to extend funding of the federal government beyond September 30th. And depending on some reports, they also may not pass a continuing resolution, which could provide them some extra time to sign a full length government funding bill. In as such, many federal government agencies may suspend operations. But does a government shutdown, how does that affect USCIS?
Well, USCIS is funded almost entirely by the filing fees that it gets from the various types of applications and petitions that it processes. So we expect that USCIS operations will continue more or less as usual. However, because there are other government agencies that are involved in immigration processes as well, we do expect to see some disruptions and inability to file certain types of cases with USCIS because of prior requirements related to other government agencies, which we'll discuss in more detail momentarily.
Definitely. So, Ian, we have seen this in the past. You, as I mentioned at the top, you have been working in immigration 10 plus years. Most recently, I remember working with you on some collateral, some materials of the most recent government shutdown, which occurred late 2018 to early 2019. That one had a minimal impact on immigration. Can you remind our audience, maybe provide a little bit more what you remember of what your work process was like during then, and how you helped clients navigate the shutdown a few years ago?
The agency whose operations are most impactful when they get interrupted is the Department of Labor. But during the 2018 to 2019 shutdown, the Department of Labor actually had a separate funding allocation and it was able to therefore maintain operations. The shutdown prior to that was in October of 2013, and at that time, the DOL suspended its operations. And we think that looking at the 2013 shutdown is more illustrative of what we are going to expect impacts to be if there is indeed a shutdown this year.
Got it. And speaking of those impacts, we don't know how long they may last for. This all kind of circles back to when Congress can pass a funding bill and eventually the president signs it. But in general, Ian, is it fair to say that the longer a shutdown lasts, the more the more disruptive
Absolutely.
it'll be to immigration?
Absolutely, yeah. The longer shutdown lasts, the more those are potential applications that are not being able to have all of their required steps completed, delays in applications that have already been submitted, and those problems will compound and grow larger the longer a shutdown lasts.
So, Ian, let's dive a little bit deeper into the effects on immigration related agencies. Let's start with USCIS. How will a shutdown affect USCIS?
So USCIS receives nearly all its funding from filing fees, so we expect it will mostly be business as usual. There may be some small areas of operation suspended, but that shouldn't really affect the ability to continue filing most employment-based type of petitions and applications, as long as the filer has all of the necessary documentation beforehand. One area where, looking back at the 2013 suspension, we would expect to see a suspension of operations would be with the Ombudsman Office, which helps can resolve some problems with USCIS. But for the most part, we expect that adjudications will still proceed and cases can still be filed uh, as long as the filer has what they need to do so.
Got it. And you mentioned the Department of Labor earlier. How will a shutdown affect the Department of Labor?
So, with the Department of Labor, for employment based immigration matters, especially particularly H-1B, H-1B1, E3, H2, and the perm labor certification process, all of those require interaction with the Department of Labor, usually as a prerequisite to being able to file with USCIS. So if the Department of Labor operations are suspended, that means that they will not be processing applications, will probably not be possible to submit new applications during a period of suspension. So that may bring to a halt any the ability, for example, to file an H-1B petition if you haven't yet gotten the certified LCA from the Department of Labor ahead of time. Would remain to be seen if USCIS would agree to make any exceptions to allow for cases that normally require an LCA to be filed to be submitted without one, or, for example, if they decide to forgive any late filings where the sole reason for the lateness was inability to get an LCA or similar document from the Department of Labor.
And looking at some of the other departments slash agencies, we have the Customs and Border Protection, the Department of State, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and then the Executive Office for Immigration Review. Can you walk us through how all of these agencies and slash departments would also be affected?
Yeah, so Customs and Border Protection is what's deemed an essential agency, so it would continue operating, although staff would be uncertain when they would next be paid. So operations we would expect would more or less continue as normal, though understandably officers may be under considerable amount of stress and anxiety regarding the situation and not knowing when they would next be paid. The Department of State, which handles visa applications processed outside the US. So, for the most part, the visa applications are funded by application fees. But if there are broader funding issues that lead embassies and consulates to have to suspend or limit their operations, that could also have a ripple effect on the ability of consular staff to continue processing visa applications. So there could be delays in the ability of people to get needed visas in order to travel to the United States.
So, Ian, let's circle back to the Department of Labor. You mentioned that their operations may be affected. They obviously DOL, as you mentioned, processes several types of applications related to immigration matters. Diving into some of the specific visa types that our listeners and viewers may be familiar with, can you walk us through how a shutdown may affect green cards, the perm process, H-1Bs, and etc.?
Yeah, so there's several types of applications that are processed by the Department of Labor, which are prerequisites to proceeding with subsequent steps in immigration processes and before filing petitions with USCIS. So the Department of Labor processes prevailing wage determinations, which are the necessary first step in the perm labor certification process for the green card sponsorship. And also for the H2A and H2B programs, there are prevailing wage determinations issued for those as well. For those who file H-1Bs as well as H-1B1 or E3 petitions, the Department of Labor processes labor condition applications, LCAs, which are a prerequisite to proceeding with those types of cases. So we would expect that LCAs would not be processed during any period of shutdown. The ETA 9142 application for temporary labor certification for the H2 petitions, H2A and H2B petitions, also necessary to be obtained from the Department of Labor. And then the perm labor certification process, the ETA 9089. We're also currently seeing extremely slow processing times on those, about 10 to 11 months of government processing for those. So we can expect with a shutdown that those processing times would only continue to worsen at this point.
Got it.
So, continuing to discuss the impact of suspensions of DOL operations, lack of prevailing wage determinations could delay green card sponsorships, H2A, H2B cases. The lack of LCA processing means that H1B, H1B1, and E3 petitions can't be filed unless the LCA was previously certified. and that could then result in lapse of status for foreign nationals if they were nearing expiration of their previous approval and an LCA hadn't been obtained in time to file. H2 employers may have delays in their ability to obtain foreign workers for seasonal or other temporary positions. The lack of ETA 909 processing, as I mentioned on the prior slide, will simply worsen the already very slow processing times that we're seeing for that case type and may have to result in redoing recruitment processes if the ETA 909 can't be completed within the required time frame. And in the 2013 shutdown, DOL's filing websites were taken offline entirely. So it wasn't even possible to log in and simply submit an application within the required time frame just to ensure that the filing deadline was met, because the filing website was not available at all. So if that happens again this time around, then we could expect to see some potential disruptions, and if accommodations aren't made to allow for late filings, that could result in some cases having to have a substantial amount of work that takes several months or longer needing to be redone.
Ian, do you recall during the 2013 shutdown when the DOL filing website was taken offline? Did that happen immediately, like as soon as the clock struck midnight or 12:01 in the morning?
So it started on October 1st, 2013, which was a Tuesday. So I'm pretty sure, as I recall, that it happened pretty quickly on that morning. This year, October 1st is a Sunday, so it may not happen until normal business hours resume. That's a question mark that we're just not sure about what the exact timing of that would be.
Looking at some possible accommodations, Ian, obviously, shutdown has wide-ranging impacts on throughout the immigration landscape, on employers, on employees, and more. In the event of a shutdown, how might USCIS accommodate some employers and other stakeholders?
So in the 2013 shutdown, USCIS announced that it would forgive late filings if the primary reason for the late filing was due to the government shutdown. There is a regulatory provision that allows USCIS to accept late filings if the filer can show that the delay was for an extraordinary circumstance outside their control. And in that situation, USCIS announced in 2013 that they would consider the inability to obtain certifications from the DOL as an extraordinary circumstance. We have yet to receive any confirmation along those lines from USCIS this time, but that's something we'll be closely watching for, if they will make any accommodations to forgive late filings, or if the DOL would allow late filings for filing windows that expired during any time when the filing websites were unavailable.
Yeah. Do you have a hunch on when they might let the public know about those accommodations?
If we do proceed with the shutdown, I would hope it would be soon, early within the shutdown period, but unfortunately, there's not a time frame that we're aware of at this point.
So a couple of minutes ago, Ian, you mentioned some case types as well as visa types that would be affected by a potential shutdown. But there are also other visas that may not be impacted by a DOL suspension. Can you walk us through some of the visas that may not be impacted by a DOL suspension?
Right. So there are certain cases as well that don't require any interaction with the Department of Labor. So the L1 classification doesn't require any certification from DOL. Those can still be filed with USCIS as usual. Canadians applying for L1 are often able to apply directly at a port of entry into the U.S. So we expect, with the Customs and Border Protection still being operational, that those applications could still continue. And many L1 applicants as well are able to apply directly at a consulate. As mentioned earlier, there's some uncertainty about to what extent consulate processing consular procedures may be affected, but those should theoretically at least still remain available. But we could see some slowdowns and delays in consular processes. The TN classification also does not require a certification from the DOL, but those may be delayed as well if there are operations at consulates or ports of entry that experience disruptions. O1 and O2 classification does not require any certification from DOL. That can be filed as usual. E1 and E2, most of those are typically filed directly at a consulate. So again, if there are suspensions or interruptions in consular operations, we could see some delays in the ability to process E1 or E2 applications. Likewise, students seeking to obtain visas to enter the U.S. in F1 or M1 classification may face delays when applying at consulates as well. The P classification also should not be impacted by DOL operations, and those can still be filed with USCIS. Green cards green cards, immigrant petitions in the EB1 or the EB2 national interest waiver classifications also don't require a certification from the DOL, so those could still be filed with USCIS as usual. I-140s and I-45s, those are part of the PERM as well as other green card sponsorship processes. So in the PERM process, you must have the labor certification from the Department of Labor before you can proceed to the I-140 filing. So if the employer has already received that certification, they'll still be able to proceed with I-140 filings and I-45 filings for people who have a current priority date. But if the labor certification has not yet been received, then that will prevent the ability to proceed with the I-140 filing. In dependent cases like H4, L2, O3, TD, classifications for spouses and children of the primary visa holders, those can still be filed with USCIS as long as they don't have to be filed concurrently with a case that requires a DOL certification. Yeah, so during the 2013 shutdown, the E-Verify system became unavailable, but employers were still required to comply with the I-9 provisions for any new employees that were hired during the shutdown. So we'd expect a similar circumstance this time. And then after the shutdown ended, the extensions were granted to allow employers to complete processes that they normally would have had to do during the shutdown period when the E-Verify system was unavailable.
So, Ian, I think the question on a lot of viewers' minds at this point is, what do I do now?
So if you're an immigration specialist at a company, communicate with stakeholders in your organizations, the foreign national employees, their managers, anyone else who depends on their work. There could be expected delays in processing times for the impacted case types. That could particularly be, for instance, if you are planning to file an H-1B petition to bring on board a newly hired employee and you haven't received their certified LCA yet, then their start date would likely have to be postponed. And the longer that a shutdown lasts, the longer that postponement may have to occur. If there are employees who are nearing the expiration of their status and are preparing an extension petition to extend their status, there could be an increased likelihood of gaps in status and work authorization for those who are already nearing the expiration of their current status. And if there were any ET 9089 cases that were nearing their filing deadline when the recruitment process becomes stale, those potentially could have to have the recruitment stage redone or obtain a new prevailing wage determination if they can't be filed in time. And certainly we think it's beneficial always to contact your congressional representatives, especially if your organization has any kind of government liaison, just to convey the negative impact on your organization from shutdown and the lapse in government operations that allow the employment-based immigration processes to proceed.
Yeah, and it's not on this slide, but for the individuals and viewers who are part of their company's immigration team, as I mentioned, we are recording this on Friday. What general suggestions would you have for these individuals when they log on or head into the office first thing Monday morning? As again, just looking at the reports, next week it's kind of crunch time.
Well, continue monitoring the news to see, if maybe a shutdown will be averted, which we're all hoping it will be. By next Monday morning, really the focus then is on awareness raising because Department of Labor processing times at a very minimum are going to be at least a week for nearly any type of case you file. LCAs generally are processed within a week, but other types of applications can take much longer. So by next Monday, September 25th, any applications filed by then, it's unlikely that you're going to receive certification before a shutdown would occur at the beginning of October. So anything that's not yet been filed by end of business today, September 22nd, is likely to face a suspension if there is indeed a government shutdown.
Ian, well, thank you so much for providing additional analysis and insights on the potential government shutdown. Any other thoughts or general suggestions for our viewers? As I mentioned, we enter this crunch time and we just wait to see what Congress does.
Yeah, it really is just understand that you'll probably experience disruptions from what you understand to be the normal of how immigration procedures normally operate. Yeah, I think that's the best thing you can do is just expect the unexpected and be patient while everybody's trying to work around the delays that may result from this situation.
Well, well, Ian, thank you so much for hopping on to record this important update. Any final parting thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I hope the information here turns out to be unnecessary and that a shutdown is averted. But unfortunately, at this point, it's looking more and more like there will be at least some short delay, potentially a longer one, due to a shutdown.
Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to check out envoyglobal.com as well as corporate immigration partners for any additional developments relating to the government shutdown.